This is Remo Daily, your daily dose of inspiration.
It is my absolute pleasure to welcome you on Remote Daily today in a new season where we focus on the future of work. I am now so honored to welcome a designer and architect. Please welcome live from, I think it's Brooklyn, Arielle Assouline-Lichten. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Felix. Great to be here. Yes, live from Brooklyn.
Arielle, I'm going to open a second screen right away because I don't want to waste time and show people your work. On your Instagram /@/objects, there is a tremendous amount of beautiful work that you do. And I want to say, after knowing you for a while, I think I even would recognize your style if I would see it somewhere. And now I have this beautiful object just to my right every single day. It's here in the picture on the bottom left, this mirror. And I think it encompasses how I got to know your design so well because it's simple, it's sturdy, it's beautiful. It has a lot of elegance to it that you don't see on the first view. You have to turn it around to see how elegant it is. And it just has a sort of timelessness to it that makes me think I will keep this forever. And wherever I go, I can take it with me. And simplicity as the highest form of sophistication, to me is what you do with so many different materials. And I just wanted to ask you to take us a little bit into the material world of your design. How do you describe it, and what elements are most important for you?
Yeah, so my ethos is very much that less is more, and I'm always trying to pare things down. And I think that the connection between different types of materials is a really interesting question to pose yourself as a designer. And how do you mediate the space between where one material ends and another one begins? And how do you kind of make decisions about that space that honors both material? So a lot of my work is kind of questioning and exploring how to refine that space so that in a way they become unified, even though they might be incredibly different and come from completely different physical elements. The kind of art and act of bridging the gap between two disparate parts becomes kind of an exercise in creating beauty, in holding tension, and in playing with functionality, because a lot of my material kind of work is in something that's very fragile, brittle. It also has a lot of strength in certain capacities, like marble, and then how that counteracts with something soft, like upholstery, or another kind of fragile material like glass, and how to kind of mitigate those different realms of the material world. I think that's just a beautiful question to constantly be asking. And to me, it also brings people into the work itself, and it makes you think about the world at large and all of the materials that we have at our fingertips to play with and to surround ourselves with.
Talking of which, I'm going to share my screen again because you have identified places all over New York City where you get your materials from. Mm-hmm. There's a metal finishing place. I think that's Long Island City. Then, of course, around Greenpoint, there's Slash Projects, your own company. But then there's the marble fab, there's the metal spinning. And it's so fast. Do you have like a favorite sort of junkyard in the city?
Yeah, my marble yard, I kind of consider it a junkyard because I go scouring for all of the remnants that are leftovers from kitchens and bathrooms, just odd sizes, exactly like this picture shows. And that's really how I started working with marble, because in Greenpoint, there especially used to be many marble yards that have all these scraps that people don't know what to do with because they're weird sizes. And I thought, well, I could transform those into something beautiful and create long-lasting products using it. And I'm just generally really interested in transforming waste and byproduct of society. So I also have kind of built a whole project on discarded tires. which there are just an unimaginable amount in the world of, tires that have really no clear next life cycle. So I created a whole line of products and furniture using recycled rubber to really show that you can take a material that is pretty mundane and has had an entire kind of existence and then turn it into something beautiful simply by making intentional choices about how you use it next to something else, and what you do with it. So
you are one reason to still love America, written here. Arielle, you were also more recently on Ellen's Next Great Designer on HBO Max. And I'm just going to share a brief clip here that shows how you are preparing for the finals.
Okay.
I can imagine you're wondering what we're doing here. This room is the location for your final challenge. You are to create a collection, a minimum of 3 pieces. What? Now, on top of all that, you guys are going to work together in a shared workspace here in LA.
Are you available? Okay, you're too busy. Okay. Oh my God. Things are not going well.
These 3 pieces of furniture are more ambitious than anything I've ever done in my entire life. I got this. I'm looking around and I realized that Arielle built 4 pieces. No, it messes up everything.
Oh. I've never seen anything like it before.
There are moments I think of genius here, and then I think there's things that need a little bit more work.
I would be proud to say that you built it and to have it in my home.
This is going to be really, really hard.
Congratulations on making it to the finals, Arielle. You came in second and you had to create from scratch, right? This was a task that they gave you just while you found out live on camera, and then you had to build.
Exactly. Yes. No, they told us with no notice that we had to make a collection of 3 pieces, and both Mark and I ended up making 4 pieces in 4 days. So it was definitely the most challenging thing I've ever had to do.
What did you take away from this experience? I mean, television is mostly different when you're in it than to how people perceive it when they watch it. What did you take away from this?
I actually was impressed at the ability of myself and a small team to be able to execute quite quickly. It takes so long to develop a product in kind of the real world of we're busy, we have a cycle of design shows, and so it can take months. But actually, when it came down to it, in 4 days, we were able to produce an incredible amount of work. And that was my main takeaway. Like, the adrenaline kind of just fuels it, and you're amazed at the results.
Anything is possible. Wow. There's another thing that I think you stand for, and not just the agility and the fact that you use the things around you and turn them into beautiful pieces. You're also a woman in a male-dominated industry. How rare is it actually, let's say, to sit on a chair that a woman designed and not a man?
I mean, yeah, it's incredibly rare. There are some iconic female designers like Charlotte Perriand, who have had a huge impact on our furniture historically, but by and large, the majority of especially mass-produced furniture is designed by men. So I think it's great to see that the field is changing. There are definitely more and more women who are founding studios and contributing designs. And it's great to see that is happening in a lot of industries right now. And design is really no different.
There's, of course, the saying, the future is female. Would you say the future of design is female?
I would definitely say so, especially the way things are going now, and the rise of more and more women being brought into the canon. I think the problem still lies in like the big industrial kind of way of the furniture being thought of, and that's still quite male dominated, but it's changing.
We have now seen how fast you can be. We have seen how beautiful it is what you can do. And we have now also learned how rare it is that you do what you do. Can you take us into your work process a little bit deeper and show us, maybe with the mirror that we just saw, how you actually go from zero to a made object?
Yeah, sure. I would love to. So I often start with a physical prototype, just something very rough. And I'll show you, this is the first prototype for the mirror that you have behind you. It was a bunch of rubber pieces kind of glued together, and trying to understand how to create the right amount of space. And then from there, I created a 3D model. And the 3D model then led to a 3D print. I'll share my screen now to show you the 3D model. So this is kind of part of the process of understanding how the 3D model and then 3D printing can lead to then creating a system for physically producing multiples of the same and exact, very precise pieces. So from the 3D model, finding the exact kind of curve of where the mirror itself needs to sit inside the base so that they nest perfectly. That's really kind of the important element of how to decide what aspects you need to take into consideration. And then exploring different sizes. These are some larger versions that we did. So it really gives you a lot of possibilities in terms of how to make decisions and produce them in the physical world. So from the 3D print, we were able to make a silicone mold that has the logo embedded in it and the exact curve. And this is kind of like a detailed silicone mold here of the curve that we needed inside of the cube. And then once we had that information, we're able to create a cast, which is made out of a hydrocal. And the cast has the exact kind of shape for the mirror to slot right in.
You probably want to stop the screen share so we can show what you just showed us physically, because you said you created this. What was the cast made of? I've never heard the word.
It's called hydrocal, which is a type of hard plaster. And so basically from the silicone mold, which has the kind of that embedded in it, and the logo, we're able to create these, and then they pull right out of the silicone mold. So it's a multi-step process that really starts with the hand building, finding the form, translating it into 3D model, 3D printing it so that you can have the precision from the 3D model, and then recasting it in silicone to be able to output many of them, essentially. So.
And you work in a sustainable way also when it comes to producing, which means that you only produce when someone orders from your website. Is that correct?
Well, depending on which product, but we do some of the pieces we produce to order, and otherwise we do small runs in order to make sure that there is no overstock, and that we're also being really mindful about how we use different materials. And my goal is always to use as few materials as possible and to minimize the amount of waste that we produce.
Fantastic. And I mean, as every design, you probably have to produce elsewhere as well, right? Are there any other countries involved when you produce a piece?
Right now, for the most part, we produce in the United States. I have done some explorations overseas in Portugal. We've produced some pieces. In Mexico, we've produced some prototypes. In India, and in Asia as well, a little bit. But for the most part, right now, 90% of the pieces are all made in the United States, and a lot of the materials originate here as well.
Wow. And when you come up with something new, I mean, this is so, when you look at the piece, it's so simple, but then all the finesse, it's so delicate that's behind it, how you make all these decisions. I wonder how you start being creative at all. There's a method called design thinking, which comes basically from the world, I think, more visual design. It says everybody can be a designer by using a certain process. we are actually using this for remote daily. It's used in the media world now a lot. It means that you listen in on a certain community and then create based on the needs or the desires of that community, be creative, prototype something, and then go back to this community and say, what do you think? Is this helpful for you? Does this fulfill any wishes that you might have? Is this something new that you find useful? And then you start iterating. So that's how I got to know design thinking. What is your design thinking? Like, what is your method of choice when you really have just a blank sheet in front of you?
I think for me, there are a few avenues that I go towards. One is really about imagining a world that I want to live in. So for me, especially in the material sense, it's been about thinking through what does that world look like and how would I go about creating it? And it's also coupled with seeing wasted material, seeing these opportunities in that, and kind of bridging those two. So if I see this leftover marble, and then I imagine what the world can look like with it and the possibilities, that's where the idea originates. And then I start to, through the constraints of the material, imagine what are the possible actual outcomes that we can create using these opportunities.
I'm going to just screen share again to give everyone an insight into what comes out when you envision the world. There's these beautiful things that really go from very, very small to very large to furniture. Is there a piece that you're particularly proud of now when I just scroll through your Instagram?
Well, for example, all of these pieces right here have been made with discarded marble, like leftover pieces, broken pieces. So I'm very proud of that, being able to claim those materials and then turn them into something that has a lot more value in the market, essentially. And I suppose one of my favorite pieces now is the chair. If you kind of scroll down a little bit more, this is the Audrey chair. I actually developed the design on the show. It was a challenge from episode 2. So this was kind of one of the pieces that I was able to refine after being on the show and bring to life. The seat is made out of recycled rubber in this black version. And again, I think for me, it plays with my affinity for simplicity, and just really paring every decision down so that you have like the cleanest connection between materials. And we have 3 different materials at play, and they have just a very seamless way of interacting, which is the challenging aspect, to make them really feel very clean and intentional in the way that they meet.
One other interesting fact about your life and work is that your career began in tech, and then you shifted over to interactive designs, to gaming. You went to school studying architecture in Harvard, and then went to Tokyo. So you have been both location-wise, but also industry-wise. You have really done design in so many places. You have also tinkered in real estate software, in fintech, in marketing. And I wonder, designing across so many industries, and your recent company is really helping a lot of different ones. Is there a common misconception about design and how design impacts our work that you find again and again and again?
I do think that, people want to be siloed, and that, this is the type of design that you do and not a different type. But going back to design thinking, it's really about a state of mind that you can apply certain strategies and ways of looking at the world through different materials. And, it makes me think of kind of the medium is the message, because you are really just employing different technologies and different mediums to execute the same way of working that can be about inclusivity, or can be about delight, or creating experiences for people to resonate with the world around them. And that is pretty much permeates all of kind of what design does. And it's about creating connections between people and communicating through materials or pixels or strategies, whatever it might be.
Now let's talk about our homes for a moment, because you you said we all tend to put ourselves in silos, and we get, of course, to your questions as well. Please, anytime, ask your question to Arielle so we can include them in the conversation here. Whenever I think about design and the last 2 years, I think about two things. One is the shortage of supply. And the other one is the fact that out of a sudden we all had to redesign our homes because we all became video people. Yeah. So let's start with the first one. How has the shortage in supply impacted what we have around us now? How has it impacted design?
Yeah, I mean, especially through the pandemic, there were shortages of materials that we never even imagined could be in that we would be short on. So I think people really had to think about their processes more and diversify how they're making. To me, it also really made me grateful to rely on my New York network of fabricators, because I was able to still produce and have kind of more control over the process, while so much was feeling like all of a sudden borders are shut down, cargo is stuck in ports. How do we overcome those challenges? So I think that now people hopefully are also more intentional about what they put in their homes, how they surround themselves, because they're aware of these global boundaries that maybe before the pandemic we took for granted, and now it's really visceral how something comes to exist and how it needs to travel and it needs to be formed and it goes through so many steps to be something that we live with, and hopefully people want to live with more intentional objects now.
I think that's a great segue into the us becoming all video people part, because one thing that I especially enjoyed in the beginning of the pandemic, it is sort of a satirical account on Twitter, but I'm gonna screen share it anyway, is Room Raider, which to this day it has actually a political pack behind it, but it started out as a satirical account that would rate people's Zoom or video backgrounds, mostly on television, always out of 10. So this gets a 6 out of 10. This is called a hostage video, 2 out of 10. Here you have an 8 out of 10. And it was just, especially in 2020, it was just so funny to follow. And it's still going. It has a huge following. A book came out. They're sometimes very partial. As I said, there's political motivation behind it. Mm-hmm. But the idea to do that is I find so brilliant and so funny, because it's this shared experience we have. So do you have actually, what are your experiences with that? Is there anything that you could share with us? How we get our Room Raider count up, how we make our own space feel like home, even for the people that just watch us?
Well, I don't know, Felix, you're doing a really good job yourself there with your beautiful background. I think. Well,
I'm just pulling together 2 IKEA cupboards, and so that people don't see my daughter's room. I mean, it's not,
working.
It's working, but it's not like. It's not home, because it's more like a cave that I have built to try to trick people into believing that it's not home. But what is the home that you recommend when we think about the design of today and tomorrow? Do you have any ideas to help everyone to think about home and how to make their own spaces feel like home more?
Yeah, I think that, kind of get into your body about what you enjoy, even in terms of colors. I think that color can really go a long way in people's homes. And even in The Artist Way, the morning pages that I do, part of the book is to kind of meditate on what color resonates with you in your life. I think that's a fun exercise to just think about. If you close your eyes and you visualize a color, and then maybe you do something that you wouldn't have otherwise done with that color, and paint a square on the wall, or buy a throw blanket for your sofa, or just little elements that bring you joy and that you might not have thought that you should have or should do. But in the end of the day, we really need to create spaces of comfort, I think, in this day and age. And that comes down to surrounding yourself with objects that give you that tactile experience of warmth and coziness.
It reminds me of an advice I received while interviewing Timur Yemosaklar, the CEO of F. Schumacher & Co., which is an interior design company that you know well. You've used their fabrics. He said paint. He's colorblind, by the way, but he recommended paint just because he said it's kind of cheap, and you can throw it on the wall. You can actually literally throw it on the wall even, and if it doesn't work, you just paint over it and it's done. It's simple, and it's not like a huge investment like a couch that you buy online and it sits in a storage for years because you're embarrassed putting it in your own home. It's a much easier way to change something. And do you do that occasionally? Do you find yourself throwing paint somewhere and see what sticks?
I recently have been thinking about doing that. I'm more the type that would make something and then put it in my home. So I'm constantly imagining new furniture pieces. Like that my home is kind of like a testing ground for living with some of these pieces that I design. And that's also a lot of where I'll kind of imagine starting. If, I kind of consider myself a client and think, well, if I can live with it, then maybe other people would like to as well. And it's like I'm my own kind of guinea pig.
Do you have a furniture sin at home? Something that you totally regret having?
You know what? I actually didn't have a sofa for most of the pandemic because I planned on making one and then never really did. So I would say that was a sin. It occurred to me that, I needed to introduce some place to be cozy, because sometimes a lot of chairs doesn't really do the trick. So I would say it's more about making sure you have all of those spaces to enjoy your home in.
Yes. And I think Timur also said that his biggest fault was buying a sofa without actually exactly imagining where it would be and then putting it into the room, and it was just a complete disaster.
Yeah.
And he just wanted it because it was from a famous design brand. So it's a complicated topic. And actually, Brandon has brought up another very complicated topic, especially these days. We see AI in the headlines everywhere. And there's a huge discussion of narratives, whether it will help us and enhance us, or whether it will, especially us as people that are now used to screens and put our minds and our knowledge elsewhere, or it will diminish what we do. And of course, what you just showed us, you're already designing through the screen. You're already probably using the 3D printer in a way that AI is helping you figure out what you want to do. So how do you feel about AI tools entering your realm, and maybe, telling people, oh, you can build a house too. Let me help you. You can build a couch too.
Well, I think that's an interesting point that Brendan brings up, because I think for me, I love technology and I always want to understand the latest technology and use it as in my practice. Even though my practice is quite analog in many ways, it still relies on technology. For me, the fear and the problem is that everything tends to kind of get homogenized. So everything ends up looking the same. I don't know if you saw recently, there was a Photoshop artist who got kicked out of some group on Reddit because they were accusing him of his work being made by AI when he actually made it by hand, but it looks like what a lot of AI art looks like. So this kind of homogenization of what we think of as computer generated. So I'm interested in exploring how we can use those tools to create something that doesn't look in that same way. And I think a lot of that has to do with, the inputs, because a lot work is essentially defined by the tools that we use, right? Like if you start introducing a certain tool, a lot of the capabilities of that tool impact the output of the work. So it's more and more important for people to first of all, a diverse group of people to be using those tools so that the inputs have different characteristics, but also continuously pushing ourselves to use it in ways that we didn't think of before, or that are not the kind of norm.
So what I'm hearing here as a response also to Brandon is that you think first it will lead to just a lot more of the same, the kind of automation that we're seeing now, and
I
then
think so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then eventually the creatives like you will figure out, well, there's a new way to use, a creative way to use these tools, and then actually something new can emerge.
Right. And that's why I don't think it replaces the creative spark in a way, because you still need people that are able to think outside of the kind of established systems to introduce new ways of working with it. You know, like when 3D printing came along, there's like a mass of a lot of the same type of uses of it that kind of rendered a lot of 3D printing kind of maybe like uninteresting or not as useful as we thought it might be. And then there are outliers who use it in ways that are extremely groundbreaking and push the technology forward. So I think there's always going to be that element of it. And probably larger groups of people using the technology are just going to end up pushing it all further forward.
This is a great maybe last question for you. While John is putting in the chat here, my mother always said you cannot ask a question without knowing the answer, and I guess AI is just pushing us to ask better questions. You said in an interview that you didn't go into architecture school to be an architect. You were actually drawn into this profession because of the maker culture in New York City.
Well, I knew I didn't want to be an architect with a kind of capital A when I went to school, but I was extremely curious about how to put things together, how to think through those problems, how I really wanted to learn, like in a broad way, how to make things. And I thought architecture was the broadest version of that, and that I could then kind of scale down and become more specific.
And could you tell us what the future of this maker culture might be? Because as you just said, it went through a phase of 3D printing that I think was really also really coming from New York. There's now places like New Lab and others that also emerged from this amazing creative community that you are and were a part of. Where's the next step for maker culture? Where's the next generation? What are they going to do?
Interestingly enough, especially in the pandemic, I think there's a move towards local makers. And there are so many young people that come out of school and they want to have their own independent brand, and they want to be independent artists and make one-of-a-kind pieces, or just pieces locally. So I definitely see a trend of young people aspiring to have be their own brand, and be creatively fulfilled by making their own work, as opposed to maybe previous generations thought, well, I'll get a job at a big company and that's kind of the safe way to go. So it's more and more, especially I think because of Instagram and people being able to interact directly with potential clients and the community, you just see so many individuals working on their own work.
Wow. Can you help us geek out for a moment and say who are some of the favorite maybe accounts that you follow? Are there any Instagrammers, any designers on Instagram, or are there other websites that you can recommend for us to catch up with this new generation of local designers and crafters?
Yeah, there's a website called Adorno, and I can post the link as well. And they it's kind of like an online platform for independent designers. And I think they do a really good job of both having kind of a local presence. They have like local curators in different cities, and then they have a global presence because they are an online platform and they ship across the world. So you get to see sort of like how the kind of community is maybe developing in Mexico City versus Stockholm versus New York. But also at large, you get to see kind of like the global trend. So I think that is just a good example.
Fantastic. I'm briefly going to share that on the screen here. Adorno.design is what you just recommended, Arielle, and you can see that you can follow the creators here. You can see, I think, where things are coming from, and you have a totally different view on design from a geographical level. Thank you so much for recommending that. And I also want to thank you for being our guest today. I have met you several times, and I always learn from you so many new things. And this was just the tip of the iceberg. I hope we can invite you back, because you are also changing your work. So I guess my last question to you would be, what can we see next from Arielle Assouline-Lichten? What is coming up this year?
Yeah, so I am preparing for Design Week in May. That's a big time in New York for new designs, and I will be showing a lot of new pieces. It's been a little bit of a slow period during the pandemic, just getting orders out, and now I'm kind of filled my creative juices, and I'm excited to show new work with some new materials in the spring. So
give us one sneak peek. What is one new material that you can reveal?
One new material, I would say it actually is in the glass realm. So there's some different ways of using glass that I'm experimenting with.
I will say, whoever can switch their cameras on, I will hold this glass here and share virtual glitter for Arielle Assouline-Lichten. And this is for you from the whole remote daily community out there. A big thank you for being our guest today. And
well, thank you for
virtual
asking
glitter
such
from
insightful
E&D.
I wanted to thank you for asking such insightful questions that really also make me think about my process, why, and just fuel more insight onto, how I've ended up here and what the future holds.
What we always want to know is, before we say goodbye to our guests, how can we support you, Arielle? What can this community do for you?
Check out my Instagram and sign up for the mailing list, and hopefully I will see you all in the spring with the launch of new pieces.
Amazing. Is there anything that you would like to share with us before our final piece of music today? Is there any personal mantra or a final thought somebody you would want to send some greetings towards? Your 30 seconds, Arielle.
Something I've been thinking a lot about recently is being rigorously tied to the impact you have on the world. And that's something I'm always trying to reframe for myself. So I just wanted to put that out there for all of you. Always going back to your core values and making sure that your future aligns with them. And that's, to me, important, a part of being a designer and creating new work that pushes boundaries forward.
You do, and we can't wait to see what you come up with next. Thanks to Arielle, our amazing guest today. Let's go off mute one last time. Next week, Sandy Pickett and Greggy Amiziel of Activating You, who support organizations in increasing well-being and productivity. That's our response to all the crazy layoffs that are happening. We look at the ones who do it better. Let's say goodbye to one another. Bye-bye. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.